What's up, guys? Matthew here. This is the first episode of my new series, Weapons and Weaknesses. This is basically my version of a pre-fight breakdown. I think the greatest weapon and greatest weakness for a fighter in any given matchup is really at the core of their game plan and sort of their path to victory in general. And when we compare these two things for both fighters and we look at the overlap, we can get an idea for how the fight will look. This video is on Adesanya versus Du Plessis, which is at UFC 305 in just a couple days. But as a little disclaimer, I'll probably be talking a lot about Sean Strickland as well, because these guys all fought each other recently. And I think comparing Izzy and Dricus' performances against Strickland shows some of their strengths and weaknesses and the differences in their style and how those will all mesh together in their fight on Saturday. So, Adesanya and Dricus are very different fighters. I'll be honest, Dricus kind of flew under the radar for me because he has kind of an ugly style. For most of his early fights in the UFC, he would get really sloppy when he got tired, which was usually by like round 2. And when he was booked to fight Robert Whittaker, I honestly thought Whittaker could have beaten him with a blindfold. But then Dricus TKO'd him in round 2, and he's the only other middleweight beside Adesanya to do that. And that was the moment where I was like, holy crap, this guy is a serious contender. So what is Dricus' greatest weapon? I think his greatest weapon in this fight is his activity. And it's not just the volume of strikes, but every single punch he throws, he's trying to take your head off. 2 years ago, I probably would have said his activity was actually his greatest weakness, because it seemed like he was breathing really heavily after like the first round, and he would start to look really sluggish and his punches were really labored. But after he had his nose surgery before the Strickland fight, he was a completely different fighter. He was throwing with like full power for the entire fight against Strickland. And that's actually why I think he won. He's a lot like Michael Chandler, but less explosive and light on his feet and nimble, but with better cardio and can basically do what Chandler does in the first round or two for like 5 rounds. Strickland is also known as a high volume striker, but he has much more of a clean technical style where he just peppers his opponents with jabs and front kicks. I rewatched their fight with Strickland and Dricus before this video, and Sean clearly won rounds 1 and 5. Like, it wasn't close, but I was actually surprised by how close rounds 2, 3, and 4 were on paper, because when I rewatched the fight, it really looks like Dricus is the aggressor because of how much sheer power he's throwing with, which is why I think he won most of the judges over in those rounds. Dricus is like a tornado, and he's just a force to be reckoned with at all times. But that sort of ugly style, I think, could be his downfall in this fight with Adesanya. And this is where we get into his greatest weakness. When Dricus is standing in the center of the octagon, he's sort of hunched over in his stance with his chin down, but one of his main attacks on the feet are these big blitzes where he comes forward with really heavy hands with lengthy combinations, and he has surprisingly long arms. And when he throws these combinations, he's pretty good at catching fighters as they're trying to get out of range, because they don't quite expect him to cover as much distance as he does. But he leaves his chin in the air, like wide open, sticking straight out as he rushes in. And especially in this fight, that's a huge problem. The other thing he does is he tends to square his hips up when he blitzes. Like, he doesn't just shuffle in and out like someone like McGregor or Wonderboy or something. But because he oftentimes is like running forward, it's these moments where he squares his hips up where I really think he's vulnerable to a counterattack. And this also ties into what I believe is Adesanya's greatest strength in this fight. Adesanya is the best counter-striker Dricus has ever faced. I mean, we've seen some pretty incredible knockouts where Adesanya and his opponent crash in, we see punches flying, and then all of a sudden his opponent is just on the ground. He's really composed in dangerous situations, and he keeps a level head, and he's really good at focusing in on his target when all these punches are flying around him. Like, he doesn't get flustered easily by these kinds of engagements. It's really easy to look at the fights between Adesanya, Dricus, and Strickland and do the MMA math thing, but it really doesn't work here because their styles are all so different. I was one of the people that thought Adesanya was going to dominate Strickland, but when I look back at the fight, it kind of makes sense that Strickland won based on their styles. Strickland puts on constant pressure, but he doesn't chase. He just slowly, constantly moves forward and just pokes. He never overcommits to anything because he's generally a pretty safe fighter. And he's just very aware of what his opponent is trying to set up, and he's just really hard to hit with how he blocks attacks and parries. It's kind of a weird combination because he puts his opponents on their heels the entire fight, but he's really defensive and never really lets his guard down to try and land some crazy knockout or something. And this is why Adesanya could never really get the upper hand in their fight, because he was always on his back foot, but Strickland never gave him windows to counter. Dricus, however, does. And this is why Adesanya's counter style will be much more effective in this fight on Saturday than it was, say, against Sean Strickland. When his opponents chase him down, he's really good at slipping, creating little angles, and finding his counters. And his power is also not to be underestimated. But of course, having a style heavily based on counterattacks sometimes puts Izzy into dangerous situations. Izzy's greatest weakness in this fight is allowing Dricus to back him up against the cage. Dricus will be coming at him the entire time, but Izzy has to keep circling out and controlling the center of the octagon. Izzy is at his best when he has space. When he gets backed up against the cage, he tends to freeze up, and just from watching his fights from a spectator's point of view, these are the moments where it always feels like he's not in control. This is where Pereira turned the tides on him in his first fight with him. I mean, Izzy was winning pretty much the entire fight up to this point in round 5 where he got backed up. This is also where Sean Strickland dropped Izzy as he was trying to counter with a left hook. When you look at all of Izzy's best finishes in the UFC, the majority of them are in the center of the octagon. Of course, the second fight with Pereira is an exception, but I guarantee you, Izzy did not want to be in that situation leading up to the finish. And like I said, he's very good at weathering the storm and keeping his focus on his opponent to try and land a counter, but when he doesn't have space, it can be really hit or miss. And a lot of those, like, holy crap, Izzy's in trouble moments happen when he's against the cage. So how do I think this fight will play out? Izzy needs to stay in the center and avoid getting backed up against the cage like the plague. Just touch him up on the feet, throw the low calf kicks, and wait for Dricus to get impatient. Dricus will also be throwing lots of low calf kicks and body kicks, as he does. And if Izzy checks these kicks, it will be good for him to stop Dricus from just spamming these kicks and scoring points. Strickland honestly did a really good job of this against both Dricus and Adesanya. Dricus, on the other hand, needs to put pressure on Izzy, but don't chase him. It's more likely that he'll get countered than to land some huge knockout by blitzing in. I won't be surprised if Dricus tries to wrestle, but Izzy's takedown defense is actually pretty good, and he definitely won't go down as easily as like Darren Till or something like that. If this fight goes to decision, I think Dricus might have a slight advantage because he just throws with significantly more power than Izzy, but as we've seen in some of Izzy's title fights, Izzy can definitely play the point game as well. I think it's unlikely that Dricus finishes Izzy, and if there is a finish, I think it's more likely that Adesanya ends up being the one to get the finish. But overall, I think this fight is very, very competitive. But I think Dricus hanging his chin in the air as he does, and Izzy's ability to land counterattacks, I think it just gives Izzy the slight advantage. Even if he doesn't land some knockout shot or something like that, landing one or two really good counters could be enough to win him a whole round, even if this fight goes to decision. So I just think Izzy has more paths to victory. I'm really excited to see this one. I slept on Dricus hardcore, but he's an absolute beast. And I think this fight will be very, very competitive. I'll be making more of these videos in the future, and I have some other new video series that I'm preparing for, so stay tuned for those. Thanks for watching.